decarbonization or learn more about us in general, please visit the website ncsuenergyclub.org. But for right now, I'm now going to pass it off to Dr. Joe DeCarolis, who is a professor in the Civil, Construction, and Environmental Engineering Department, who's also our advisor to the club, to introduce our speaker for today.
All right, thanks, Martina. Well, we're very fortunate and honored to have Tyler Norris as our speaker today. So I'm going to give a little bit of his background. So Tyler is actually a graduate of the North Carolina School of Science and Math for local folks, and he received his BA from Stanford University. In 2012, Tyler was appointed by the White House to serve as a special advisor to the Energy Secretary, and he spent 4 years in the Obama administration working to advance President Obama's clean energy and climate agenda. After that, he was a director at S&P Global, which is a leading global market intelligence consultancy. And there he led market analysis on alternative energy technologies, and he advised some of the world's largest energy businesses. In 2017, he returned home to North Carolina to work on renewable energy development across the Southeast. He's currently serving as the head of utility scale development for the Southeast at Cypress Creek Renewables, which was named the top US utility scale solar developer by Solar Power World magazine in 2019 and 2018. In that job, he oversees commercial strategy, policy engagement, offtake and site origination and development operations across the region. In 2019, Tyler was awarded the Clean Energy Leader of the Year by the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, which is quite an honor. He's also a recipient of the Truman Scholarship and Forbes 30 Under 30. And I'll add that he's a great, if you're on Twitter, he's a great follow on Twitter. His handle is Tyler H. Norris. And so if you're interested in Southeast energy news, give him a follow. One procedural point here is this is set up as a Zoom webinar. So if you have questions, use you'll see a little Q&A box at the bottom. Enter your questions there, and then when Tyler's done with his presentation, we'll queue up the questions and go through those. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tyler. Tyler, it's great to have you, and looking forward to the presentation.
Thanks so much for the really generous intro. First lesson is never tweet. It will get you in trouble. And thanks so much to the Energy Club for hosting this. I have a very soft place in my heart for energy clubs, having participated in them back in the day, and just think they provide such a constructive platform for emerging energy leaders. So just want to thank you all for everything you're doing. Wanted to talk a little bit today about what's going on in the Southeast with electricity decarbonization. Definitely a little bit of a bent towards Carolinas, just given all the action that's going on here and its implications. So bear with me if we do spend a good bit of time in the Carolinas, but we can just go ahead and dive right in here, and more than happy if questions come up to address them afterwards. And also if you have follow-up questions after the presentation, later on, just always feel free to reach out. Happy to engage folks on these topics at any time. Let's see if I can advance there we go. So just, big broad context here. If we're thinking about the decarbonization target for the US electricity sector that was just met, set by the US climate commitment, this represents that at a national level. And so, the US commitment is to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 50% below the 2005 baseline by 2030. And there's broad consensus that in order to achieve that, the electric power sector will have to be the linchpin, and that it will need to reduce by approximately 80% below that 2005 baseline for electric power. So what you're looking at here is the US electric power sector greenhouse gas emissions. You can see that 2005 baseline of 2.4 gigatons a year. And then you can see the pathway, you can see where we are right now, which is approximately 1.6 gigatons. That was in 2019. And then you can see the path that we would have to take in order to meet that target for 2030 of actually approximately 83% reduction from the 2005 level, again, to contribute towards this overall reduction of 50% greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And what that will require, as you see, is we essentially have to eliminate all emissions from coal power by 2030, and then we'll have to see about approximately 30% reduction in emissions from gas-fired power plants. So it is an incredibly ambitious target. It is arguably achievable. There's a lot of analysis going on right now about what will be required to meet this on an economy-wide level, but this gives you a sense of the broad context. And so if we look at this from a regional level, you can see this is broken down by electricity market in the US. This is from, I posted back in April about this and just tried to guide folks through thinking about, at a regional level, how does this target translate, and where is the highest concentration remaining of electric power sector greenhouse gas emissions. And so you can see, MISO very much in the lead there, both on an aggregate basis and nearly on a per capita basis. But then the Southeast, which is the CERC there, the Southeast Energy Reliability Council, does come in second, at least for 2019. You can see pretty even distribution there for CERC between coal and gas. And then on down, PJM, WEC, et cetera, What is truly remarkable is how low greenhouse gas emissions are from the electric power sector from some of the largest electric power markets in the country, which include California, New York, and of course, ISO New England. So that for them is both on an absolute level and a per capita level. So pretty remarkable. So, the implication here is that we're going to have to put a lot of time and effort, resource, and creative thinking into these 3 or 4 top sectors here in order to have a chance of meeting this target. So if we think about, CERC specifically, and by the way, this is just a state breakdown, so you can see each state 2019 total and per capita electricity sector greenhouse gas emissions, how much of it's from coal, how much of it's from gas, and then on the right-hand side actually it's for each state their percentage of the U.S. average emissions per capita. We won't spend too much time on this, but that might be a helpful breakdown for folks. And then you can see here, this is rank ordered, the top 15 states for each of these. So on the left-hand side, you have all electricity. Texas, as you can see, leads in all categories. The second column is coal-fired power electricity emissions. And then for natural gas electricity emissions. And, there are a lot of interesting sort of trends we could talk about here, but I think, for us in the Southeast, it is worth noting that there are several Southeastern states that show up on each list. So North Carolina is one of those. I believe that Georgia is one of those. Yes, there it is on each of them. I believe Alabama as well. And there may be one or two others. Which just gives you a sense of kind of the geographic distribution of our electricity sector emissions. And then this is just kind of a breakdown, give you a sense of overall share by state, top 15, and then all others. And then this is just a map to help kind of orient you. So those same top 15 states, where are they located across the US? And outside of Texas, Arizona, Wyoming, a very significant concentration in the Southeast and the Midwest there. And if you look at it specifically in terms of coal, I think it's just interesting. This is where half of all US electricity sector emissions are coming from coal power. And you can just see how heavily they are concentrated in this particular geographic zone. Indiana, they're at the top of the list. North Carolina in that top list there too, Georgia, Alabama, a couple other nearby states. So if we think about this, from the standpoint of coal, this is a remarkable opportunity that we do have right now to phase out these highly uneconomic coal units, especially in the Southeast. And so this is an analysis. It's a little dated now, but the fundamentals still hold. It's from 2018, but it's from Bloomberg Energy Finance. And they looked at all coal-fired power plants across the country to identify which units are most uneconomic in terms of their long-run operating margins. And you can just see how heavy that, and the deeper red is the lower margins or negative margins. And you can just see how heavy a concentration there is in the Southeast and in the Carolinas. And so, we just zoom in. There's approximately, this is as of about a year or two ago, there are approximately 15 gigawatts of remaining coal-fired capacity in the Carolinas with the opportunity to phase out. You can just see this breakdown on a utility-wide basis. So again, as of 2018, this was the top utility for the most uneconomic coal capacity in the United States. And you can see sort of on down the line there, the other utilities that make that list too. This is another report that reached pretty similar conclusions, a little fuzzy, I apologize, but it's from Energy Innovation and Vibrant Clean Energy. And it identified actually North Carolina as the state with the most at-risk coal capacity in the United States. And they were actually looking at combination of the operating margins on those coal units, but also the opportunity to replace them with more economic zero carbon capacity based on the cost of new zero carbon energy in those localities. And it turned out that North Carolina at that time made the very top of that list. And so that was part of the reason I thought it'd be helpful to put a little bit of emphasis here and narrow the scope a bit to the Carolinas, but it is very much a microcosm of what's going on in the broader Southeast and nationally. But just to orient us, this is the Carolinas electric power sector. There are four major utilities, I should say five, but four indicated here. So you can see there are two major Duke utilities. There's DEC, which is Duke Energy Carolinas. There's DEP, Duke Energy Progress, which is the eastern part of North Carolina and the upper eastern part of South Carolina. There is Dominion, South Carolina. It used to be South Carolina Electric and Gas until it was acquired by Dominion after what occurred with VC Summer. And then there's Sandy Cooper, which is actually one of the only remaining state-owned utilities in the country. It's a fun fact. And then you can just see on kind of a volumetric basis, just to help orient you in terms of market opportunity, how large these utilities are. So on a peak load basis, in aggregate, it's about 43 gigawatts. To just put that in perspective, that is approximately equivalent to the total peak load of all of California. And you may say, well, how could that be? California is so much larger than the Carolinas. And it's probably because they don't have nearly the same extremes in weather, both on a summer and winter basis. So they have much more mild weather and therefore a lower overall peak. And then you can just see, just to give you a sense of how much additional opportunity we have to deploy renewables here. You can just see as a percent of that peak load how much solar had been procured as of, in this case, these charts were from 2020. So that's sort of the Carolinas overall. Now, as you can see, Duke is a very large portion of this overall electric power system here, approximately 33 gigawatts of that overall 43 gigawatt peak. So a lot of the remaining coal capacity is on Duke's system, a lot of the gas capacity, a lot of the proposed gas capacity we'll talk about in a second. But there really is an immense opportunity for us to advance the overall energy transition here on Duke's system that includes both North and South Carolina. And so just to orient, Duke Energy, our local utility here, they also do own several other utilities in other states. That is their headquarters. It's in Charlotte. That is the Duke Tower. They are, by any measure, one of the top 2 to 3 largest utilities in the United States. This is a market capitalization of the largest utilities in the country as of April of this year. Duke, I think it slipped down to number 3 or 4 as of earlier this year. They just saw a pretty bullish appreciation in their market cap over the past 3 to 4 months. And so you can see they're just, they're second to NextEra now. And then you can see US utilities rank ordered by the largest greenhouse gas emissions. This is from RMI's Utility Transition Hub, really excellent tool. If you haven't used it yet, highly recommend it. But that does show you the rank order of the highest emitting utility holding companies in the United States. So Duke Energy topping the list there. And then in terms of remaining coal, without a 2030 retirement date already scheduled or before 2030, you can see here it's a little probably easier to just look at the right-hand side in terms of parent company. There again, Duke Energy does top the list of most remaining coal in the United States of any utility that does not have a 2030 or prior retirement date. And then this is planned or proposed gas capacity among all US utilities, rank ordered. And again, on the left, it's operating company. It may be more instructive to look at the right-hand side, which is parent company. There again, Duke Energy topping the list of the most proposed gas capacity of any utility in the United States. And then here it shows up. So you can see it, it's heavily concentrated in the Carolinas. So this is Duke Energy's 2020 integrated resource plan. They did propose 6 different scenarios, and there's a lot of information here, so I won't try to go through it all. Some of you are probably already familiar with this, but it is instructive. So you can see here is there are 2 base cases. The first is base case without carbon policy. It's for the most rudimentary base case. There is a base case with carbon policy that assumes a modest carbon price coming into effect beginning in 2025 and rising incrementally thereafter. And then there are several other scenarios here. A couple of interest are those that do achieve a target of 70% reduction from North Carolina's electric sector greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which is also North Carolina Governor Cooper's target for North Carolina's electric power sector by 2030. And you can see some of the makeup there of different resources, but just to draw your attention to the gas row here, you can see that concentration. So in the base case, it would be approximately 10 gigawatts of new gas coming out of the system. In the base case with carbon policy, it'd be about 7.3 gigawatts proposed. And both of those base cases were endorsed by the North Carolina public staff and as part of the current integrated resource planning process. So under business as usual in the current IRP process, it is generally expected that one of those 2 scenarios will be approved. Now, that may not necessarily lead to all those gas facilities actually getting built, but it does give you a sense of what the current business as usual pathway is for the Carolinas. Just to give a sense of what that could mean if the utility did abide by their corporate climate commitment, which is to reduce their utility-wide greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050, compared to this currently proposed gas capacity expansion plan. You can see there in the yellow line, that's their CO2 emissions pathway, assuming straight line from 2020 to 2050. And then this shows the excess of emissions that would come from these. Well, there's also stranded coal, but you can see from the stranded CTs and the combined cycle gas units, if they were operated similar to their current operating conditions. And this is a report that some of you might have seen called Carbon Stranding from earlier this year. And then if you think about this from a cost perspective, if in fact those units, those new combined cycle and CT units were forced to not operate in order to comply with the utility's corporate climate commitment, this is a tabulation of the total stranded asset costs that would occur and theoretically or potentially be imposed on the ratepayers of Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress. And so this is on an annualized basis, and then the yellow line is cumulative, so potentially reaching as high as 4 to 5 billion. So that's the business as usual base case IRP, but there are other pathways that are possible here, and this is where things get a little bit more exciting. And so this is an alternative IRP analysis that was conducted by Synapse Energy Economics. It was introduced by our trade association and several other organizations as part of the current IRP proceeding in North Carolina and South Carolina. And they used an advanced electric power capacity expansion planning and production cost analysis software package, which is considered one of the more advanced models available. And what they did is they first ran a scenario attempting to mimic Duke's methodology to come up with a scenario that looked relatively similar to what Duke had modeled, in order to make sure that sort of the underlying methodologies were aligned. And then they adjusted some key inputs, including resource costs on a couple of fronts in particular, and in a way that at least the interveners saw as being more realistic. And these were the results. So in this, what they called their reasonable assumptions scenario, the alternative scenario, what they saw was an incremental addition of approximately 18 gigawatts of utility scale solar, about 12 gigawatts of new battery capacity, 2.5 gigawatts of new onshore wind. They did end up seeing some additions in the model of offshore wind. And then overall actually saw a substantial reduction in the overall system cost. It is worth noting that this model did not attempt to model transmission congestion or potential transmission upgrades required for this amount of capacity, but generally expected that it would be a share of that $7.5 billion and not in a way that would offset all those savings. To give you some sense, it's generally expected right now that to enable a substantial offshore wind capacity off North Carolina shore would be approximately $2 billion upgrade. But actually their original analysis did not identify offshore wind. So it just depends on which resources we're trying to enable. And then that would overall achieve a nearly 75% reduction in CO2 from the 2005 baseline. And it's really important to note that all of this did maintain full 70% planning reserve margin on average throughout the course of the planning period. So that gives you a sense of what could be possible with sort of alternative modeling and alternative kind of resource pathway. One area I thought might be interesting to highlight here, and it is one of the most, at least for me, one of the most interesting complexities to all this, and it is the question of how to meet a winter morning peak if in fact the system is winter peaking. And there's a lot of analysis underlying this with respect to loss of load expectation. But in general, the question is, if in fact we do have a relatively substantial winter weather contingency event, and we are, on this alternative resource pathway with really high penetration of solar and storage and wind, what does that look like for, an emblematic, say, winter morning? And actually, in this case, an emblematic winter day. So this is taking that Synapse alternative scenario, the reasonable assumption scenario in January 2030, and looking at a representative, I think it is the highest winter peaking day in that particular month. And you can see sort of how the system responds, or how the model responds, given the available resources. And so based on Duke's own underlying resource adequacy analysis that informs their IRP and their own loss of load expectation analysis, this is what the model comes up with, and it finds that this resource mix is fully capable of meeting the full 70% planning reserve margin through all hours of the resource planning period, which in this case is 15 years. And all that said, there is substantial additional analysis to be conducted on this front, and a really fruitful area for research and analysis for emerging energy leaders and analysts, like many that are at NC State or otherwise, that are thinking about how are we going to design an electric power system capable of meeting these potential winter contingency events. Obviously, we did see some of those occur in other parts of the country earlier this year. and it is something that we're going to need to prepare for. It's also interesting to think about how do we ensure that we're mitigating that winter morning peak as much as we reasonably can, given that it is substantially simpler to meet a summer peak and for a summer peaking system. And you may intuitively think that the Southeast, we should have a summer peaking system, but at least based on some of the recent data, there has been an increasing shift towards a winter morning peak. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. It's also that in itself is contested because it's not always on an absolute basis, it's on a probabilistic basis. But what's certain is that we know it's easier to meet a summer peak, especially given the prevalence of the solar resource in our region. And so there should be a great priority on targeting those winter morning peaks through demand side management programs to put as much downward pressure as we possibly can. So definitely a fruitful area of additional analysis and consideration for everyone. Another interesting area of analysis that does have substantial implications for the overall resource planning process is the overall capacity contribution from solar, given that, as you've seen, solar is by far right now the most economic zero carbon resource at scale in our region. But its ability to contribute towards that planning reserve margin and that on-peak capacity really makes a difference with respect to how much solar we can incorporate onto the system. And so this is a whole area of analysis, and Professor DeCarlos with us has also done some excellent research on this topic. Hope he gets a chance to highlight it. But looking at the synergistic effects between solar and storage and their ability to provide a greater capacity contribution than really the sum of the parts. And so I guess the high level message here would be there's great synergy to come from pairing solar with battery storage in a way that makes a larger capacity contribution to the system than one might expect. And so when we commissioned E3 to do exactly this analysis for Duke System as part of the current IRP, this is a summary of their results. And what they found is that, and this is based on, there's a whole set of loss of load expectations and stochastic analysis underlying this, where they ran thousands of years of different load and supply data. And what they found is that, yes, there are very meaningful synergistic effects between solar and storage that can contribute more towards the on-peak capacity need than existing analysis has found, and in particular the ELCC analysis that underlied the utilities IRP that was filed in 2020. So for anyone interested in exploring this area of research further, I highly recommend E3's report. It is in the IRP proceeding filed there. We can give you a follow-up link if you're interested, and then I'm hoping that our professor here can maybe give a plug for his research too. So continuing on here. So if we take a step back and we think about the opportunities that we have in front of us to advance decarbonization of electric power in the Carolinas and North Carolina, we really have two routes to do so, at least via our state level mechanisms. And that's setting aside the possibility of federal action or a possible federal clean electricity standard or other potential regulations that could be under development by EPA that could accelerate the retirement of some of the fossil units or impose new standards on new proposed fossil units. At the state level, we have two routes. And so the first is through our utility commission and the integrated resource planning process. That's what we sort of just reviewed here, is a little bit of the analysis that has gone into this current IRP. And there is, cautious optimism that the utility commissions in North Carolina and South Carolina will rule favorably and hopefully adopt the recommendations of the interveners and really give a serious look at this alternative analysis to consider, a resource pathway that would be, more aligned with what has been presented by the interveners. And the good news is that we are seeing some hopeful steps in that direction. The South Carolina Commission just issued a directive in the South Carolina Duke IRP proceeding just in the past couple weeks. And they did in fact adopt nearly all of the recommendations from our interveners group to have the utility update a variety of the assumptions and inputs that were used in the IRP to hopefully come up with a more reasonable resource portfolio. And so that included a variety of different inputs, from solar prices to battery prices, to also the effective load carrying capacity, the capacity contribution factor that I just mentioned, the ELCC analysis, gas prices as well, and then a couple other factors too. So the South Carolina Commission has taken that step. The utility will refile its resource plan within approximately 2 months, and we'll see what those results look like. The South Carolina Commission does have the authority to independently, irrespective of what the North Carolina Commission does, to independently, require the utility to proceed with renewable power procurement on the basis of that updated IRP, if they deem that in the public interest. So we'll see what comes from the South Carolina side. The same set of evidence is before the North Carolina Commission right now, and we will see what happens. It's possible that they will also require the utility to update those inputs or not. One of the challenges, as mentioned, was that the public staff has endorsed these two base case scenarios as reasonable for planning purposes for North Carolina. And generally, the North Carolina Utility Commission has been very hesitant to go beyond what the public staff recommends. So it's going to be really interesting. We're all on the edge of our seats to see what is going to happen in this proceeding. I think, the general sense among, most stakeholders that are looking at this and have been involved is that, given the history of the commission largely aligning or hesitating to go beyond the recommendations of public staff, that it would be surprising if they went substantially beyond those recommendations, and certainly on a long-term basis. So, it may be that, optimistically, there are, say 1 or 2 additional tranches of renewable procurement that comes out of the North Carolina proceeding, say between 500 to 1,000 megawatts of additional renewable procurement. But I think general expectation is that we are not likely to see a ruling that would suggest, a resource pathway along these lines. So with that in mind, we come to the other pathway that is before us to attempt to advance the decarbonization of the electric power sector here in North Carolina and really across the whole Duke system across the Carolinas. And that is, via the legislative process. And there has been a really substantial effort over the past 18 months with a lot of different stakeholders involved in the governor's clean energy plan implementation process to identify areas for legislative action that could help to achieve, the governor's target for 2030 of 70% below that 2005 baseline for the electric power sector, and a lot of really well-considered proposals that came out of that process. And so there has been a legislative process. There are a lot of different opinions and reactions to what the current legislature has put out in draft form. And there are a lot of different provisions to it. And although we have time to talk about all of them, and I certainly am not here to represent any position on them, but I did think it would be valuable for folks to understand what is included in the current draft with respect to this question of accelerating zero carbon power deployment. And so just purely look at the numbers. This is what's in the current draft. It would deploy approximately 5,500 megawatts of new renewable capacity over the next 6 years from a procurement standpoint. That's nearly a gigawatt a year on average of new procurement. The large majority of that would be via the state's existing competitive procurement of renewable energy program, which was authorized in 2017 by HB 589, the Competitive Energy Solutions Act. It's already delivered a lot of projects and megawatts and cost savings for the state that we can certainly talk about, but predominantly via the CPRE program. There would be another 750 megawatts available for large C&I customers, many of which, as you know, are clamoring for more access to renewable power. And then there would be some capacity set aside for a community solar program. So just tallying up, and this is using NREL's JEDI model and a similar methodology, just tallying up the economic impact of those megawatts, be about $7.5 billion of investment in the state over 6 years, up to 25,000 direct jobs are in construction. The local tax revenue benefits being a really substantial part of this, and one of the reasons why our rural counties in North Carolina have been very invested in attracting more private investment in these types of projects. So that would be approximately 220 million in tax revenues to localities over the lifetime of these projects. It'd be about $1.5 billion of payments to landowners over the lifetime of the projects, assuming all of those projects were under lease structures. And then in terms of ratepayer savings, from an avoided cost standpoint, or really the avoided cost of the coal capacity, but at least our estimation, it would deliver a little over $500 million in savings to ratepayers by 2030. So just to give you a sense of what that would look like. And then from a procurement standpoint, you can see the schedule here. This is on a cumulative basis. So those are the CPRE megawatts in yellow there, and then the shared renewable capacity, and then the community program. And then this, I think, is one of the most interesting views. It is looking at this proposed renewable deployment pathway in the current draft legislation before the North Carolina legislature, which is HB 951. So it's the line in yellow here. And how does that stack up compared to these most aggressive renewable deployment scenarios that we do see from various analysis? So you can see from Synapse, the report we just reviewed, the Synapse IRP model. And blue, you can see what that deployment pathway looked like through 2029. This is from their original filing. If we update it for their corrected filing, there's a little bit of a bump up in near-term procurement. And then you can compare it to these alternative Duke IRP scenarios, including their most accelerated renewable deployment scenario for solar. That's their no new gas scenario 6. And the basic takeaway is that the proposed renewable expansion in this legislation is nearly equivalent to the most robust and ambitious renewable deployment pathways that have been identified by essentially any of the recent resource planning analysis, and that this is a minimum baseline that would be proposed by legislation. In fact, the Utility Commission could go beyond this volume. So, people look at numbers in different ways and draw different conclusions, but I think it's helpful for for folks to look at the numbers and see how they stack up to some of these other scenarios. And again, just for reference, this Duke IRP scenario is 2 to 3. That includes the accelerated coal retirement scenario, which actually has the exact same solar volume. So that's why it refers to scenario 3 there. But that is what the expected business as usual pathway is that Duke IRP scenario 2 to 3. And so, a big part of this, and in reference to the coal, is that there's a whole other provision of the bill which would require approximately 5 gigawatts of coal capacity to retire, and that's part of what's enabling this new capacity to come online. So maybe I'll pause there, just given that we're already a little past 3:40. Would love to leave a little bit of time for questions. And yeah, I hope this has been a valuable perspective for you all, and I look forward to follow-ups.